to The Fitterist Show with your host, Christopher Allen, where we explore the art of mind and body conditioning. The use of Adderall, a drug prescribed by doctors to treat patients with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, or ADHD, or other substances that help people focus, have long been associated with college students usually pulling all-nighters and cramming for a test or finishing a research paper. But over the past several years, with the rise in popularity of eSports, drugs like Adderall have been used by competitive gamers as a kind of performance enhancer to sharpen their response times, their mental acuity, and their reflexes during gameplay. Now, as the appeal of eSports and competitive gaming continues to rise with equally robust prize money and lucrative sponsorship deals hanging right there in the balance, the temptation for players to gain a competitive advantage via drugs like Adderall is real. In this episode of The Fitterist Show, we take a look at what exactly constitutes a performance-enhancing drug. Could the use of mental performance-enhancing drugs like Adderall create an unfair competitive advantage for some players? And how should prescribed substances be regulated, if at all, by the esports leagues? So let's dive in. So first, let's understand, what is Adderall? Well, Adderall is a combination medication that's used to treat attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ADHD, and it works by changing the amounts of certain natural substances in the brain. Amphetamine, or dextroamphetamine, belongs to a class of drugs known as CNS, or central nervous system, stimulants. These can help increase your ability to pay attention, stay focused on an activity or task, and control behavioral problems. It may also help you to organize your tasks and improve some of your listening skills. This drug, this amphetamine salt drug, is also used to treat certain sleeping disorder, narcolepsy, to help you stay awake during the day. So how large is the Adderall market size? There were approximately 6 million under 18 people and 16 million adults under 40 with ADHD prescriptions in the United States. And the student population has become a full-blown, albeit secondary market for these drugs. But make no mistake, that secondary market is massive. When we take a look at the total revenue for pharmaceutical companies in 2019 for the broader class of ADHD drugs, so not just Adderall, but a broader ADHD drug segment, it's about $13 billion, a figure that's been steadily climbing for the past 5 years, and over the past 20 years, that number has increased 50-fold. So 50x increase to $13 billion for ADHD drugs in 2019. Adderall is clearly the most famous of the ADHD drugs, and it boosts focus and productivity far more than any commercial nootropic. A well-established black market really thrives on university campuses and in financial centers, supplying these drugs to people desperate to gain a competitive edge. But despite its popularity, recent research would suggest that the Adderall actually alters the balance of chemicals in the brain tethered to our emotions, in this case dopamine, which we've talked about before on the show, which is responsible for the feelings of reward and pleasure. So the drug Adderall makes people feel more motivated or upbeat, and therefore content to work much more intensely for longer periods of time. Our brains then crave the rewarding high generated by increased dopamine, meaning that the users of Adderall eventually become compelled to maintain this kind of elevated, intoxicating state. Adderall and its sibling drugs have been taken in by the marketplace as a short-term means to an end, reflective of a working culture that rewards those who push themselves to the limit. Their usage, Adderall's usage, in academic settings is now well known. Around 30% of American students say they have taken Adderall or an Adderall-like stimulant at least once. As university degrees and jobs become only more and more competitive, these numbers seem likely to grow, evident in the 50-fold increase in the pharmaceutical legitimate prescription marketplace of Adderall over the last 2 decades. Now let's turn to esports and just how big esports is. Well, Esports and gaming, competitive gaming, have really burst into the mainstream in recent years, which was once just a niche, is now a core central form of entertainment around the world. Multiple esports leagues have been formed, and you have increasing coverage of esports from traditional media outlets like ESPN and the obvious rise in games like Fortnite. So global esports market is growing roughly from a $1 to $1.5 billion market in 2020 to $2.5 to $3 billion marketplace by 2022, according to Goldman Sachs. In addition, investments in esports and esports-related companies and leagues are up to $4.5 billion were invested in esports companies in 2018, up from $490 million in 2017. So a tenfold increase in investments in esports that really confirms its staggering growth rate. And esports is a global phenomenon. So the Asia Pacific region, North America, and Europe are the top 3 esports markets in terms of both audience and revenue. And Asia Pacific alone will account for over half of global esports viewership in 2019. So how does esports make money? Well, they have a number of ways. Media rights, live event ticket sales, merchandise sales, in-game purchases, but by far the largest share of money flowing into esports comes in the form of both sponsorships and advertising, which account for almost 70% of the esports revenue. While the use of Adderall in esports has probably been around since likely its inception, you're starting to get players that are speaking out and confirming that. One player said that his entire team was on Adderall while playing in a tournament with a $250,000 top prize. Another top player claimed that in the Overwatch League alone, there are about 20 players or so that use Adderall. And yet a third player claimed that in the Gears of War community, that, quote, easily over half the players are using Adderall. And some of these players are even saying that the Adderall abuse at events was something that is starting to become a major problem. Some of these players have been in the esports leagues for, in this case, about 8 years, actually stepped away because of the rampant drug abuse, that the Adderall abuse was just too much to keep up with, and he decided to take a step back. And in response to some of these claims, at least one league, the Electronic Sports League, ESL, decided to employ the Esports Integrity Coalition to begin drug tests. So problem solved, right? Well, not exactly. Those with prescriptions for ADHD medications can be granted a waiver for a positive test. This is specifically in the ESL's Counter-Strike League. No other game tested by any other tournament organizer. Most leagues don't fully prohibit or test for Adderall or similar stimulant-based substances. Most leagues, in fact, just state that prescription drugs may be used only by the person they are prescribed to in the manner, combination, and quantity as they are prescribed. So the challenge here, of course, aside from a rampant black market for Adderall and similar type substances, you can just go get a prescription, and now you're fine, according to the leagues. And most leagues will issue a statement like the following: we regularly review, this is quote, we regularly review these rules for compliance with local laws around substance classifications and player privacy rights. We will continue to consult with medical experts, regulators, and player representatives to properly safeguard the well-being of our players and the long-term health of the sport. Some even go a step further that says Adderall is a legal prescription in the United States, and there's actually no data that suggests that it makes you better at playing esports. And this was specifically to the Overwatch League. Even the players themselves kind of have mixed opinions on whether or not Adderall is a true performance enhancer or not. There's a lot of players that say, hey, there's a lot of people in the leagues that take Adderall but still don't win the tournaments. They still don't beat the best people. If it was such a huge difference between players taking Adderall or not, it would likely be a bigger deal and they'd be winning even more tournaments. They contend that, look, Adderall might give you a little bit of an edge, but it's not some magical pill that instantly makes you amazing at a game. You still need to log the hours and to have the skills to compete. And still on the other side, you have people that do take Adderall that say they won't compete unless they're on something like Adderall, and he has multiple prescriptions to ensure that he could be successful in his gameplay. He says, "My reaction and processing time is exponentially greater than playing without Adderall. It feels like steroids for video games." And you still have yet a third category of athletes that just take it because they think the best players are taking it and it might give them some advantage. Or they feel the peer pressure that everyone else on their team is taking it, so maybe I should take it. Some gamers even believe that Adderall and drugs like it should be completely banned from competitive gaming events. And they cite that, hey, the governing bodies that oversee traditional sports, like WADA, the World Anti-Doping Agency, and USADA, the U.S. Anti-Doping Agency, consider Adderall to be a performance enhancer. And if you look at the professional sports leagues, the NFL, Major League Baseball, and the NBA all have Adderall on their banned substance list. And it's on those lists because essentially Adderall is amphetamine salts, as we talked about at the very outset. And it can be psychologically addictive. So the challenging question for the esports leagues, what do they do? On one level, at a very surface level, they could just say, look, we're going to do mandatory drug testing at tournaments, but if you're prescribed, you get a pass, which, as we all know, it's very easy to get a prescription for Adderall, whether it's under false pretenses or it's legit. Outside of that, gamers say that Adderall is very easy to obtain. Another challenge with the sports leagues is the cost and difficulty to implement drug testing. So the ESL, that is the league that has instituted drug testing, says they spend about $40,000 per year on drug testing, which in the big picture, when the purse of one tournament is $250,000, $40,000 doesn't seem like a lot to spend per year on drug testing. But one has to remember that there are certain levels, right? There's the League of Legends, there's Overwatch, there's major tournaments that are massive. But if you're a smaller tournament operator, you might find it much more of a challenge financially to implement drug testing. An added wrinkle to that is that by its definition, esports is a global phenomenon, and players do not always reside in one physical location. They could be playing tournaments anywhere around the world. And as such, there's not really a straightforward, feasible method for a governing body to know if participants are indeed using performance-enhancing drugs like Adderall. And making it even more challenging is if you start to ban Adderall, it could be a quick and slippery slope for drugs like caffeine. Now, even the NCAA currently limits caffeine consumption for college athletes. But here's the rub. Caffeine products and energy drinks are one of the biggest and most frequent sponsors of esports competitions. So you start banning those, guess what? Those people are going to pull out from their sponsorships, and now the league and the tournament has a revenue shortfall to try to make up. And remember, granting free passes to people because they have a prescription for Adderall is also another complication because it just encourages people to get a, quote, legitimate prescription for Adderall, and they can compete, no questions asked. So these leagues have a bit of a conundrum. You've got highly skilled and competitive athletes taking drugs like Adderall to improve their performance within the esports community and their performance within the tournaments. So look, those competitors, especially if prize money keeps going up, they're not going to stand up and initiate a change. They're more likely to do whatever it takes to make it big in esports. If they can pull in 7 figures from playing esports and taking Adderall, there's going to be a good chunk that absolutely do that. So in summary, I found this article pretty fascinating and interesting because it is a microcosm of a much larger issue with sports, competitive athletics in the United States and frankly in the entire world. There's a really good documentary movie. It was released back in 2008 by documentary filmmaker Chris Bell called Bigger, Faster, Stronger. The underlying premise of this article mimics that of this documentary movie because it poses a great question and basically asks, if you could do something, take something that makes you X% better in your career, in your profession, in your gaming, in your athletics, would you do it? And I think there are a number of examples of questions just like this microcosm of Adderall within eSports. And I know not all of these are exact apples to apples, but you get the idea with some of the following, just to throw them out there. So you've got a category of vanity for actors and models. So you've got hair plugs, tooth veneers, Botox, cosmetic surgery. You've got LASIK eye surgery for pretty famous people like Tiger Woods, race car drivers, so that they can see better and make quicker reactions based on what they see. You've got competitive cyclists that use high-altitude sleeping chambers to improve their oxygen in their blood. Is that legit? You've got world-class orchestral string players on beta blockers, drugs, to improve their overall performance so they don't have jitters when they play. Is that legit? You've got United States Air Force pilots taking stimulants to improve flying performance and make sure they don't fall asleep at the wheel of a $35 million aircraft. And of course, a subcategory of Adderall is college students taking Adderall to improve their studying, focus, and performance. Nothing to do with esports, just to get better grades, to place better in their position in their class, to maybe get a better job. Probably some of the broadest topics covered by media is around athletes. So performance enhancement in baseball, football, weightlifting, the Olympic sports, track and field, endurance athletics, cycling, and one could go on and on with the list. And when you start to look at some of the finances, I remember reading an article that said winning the 100-yard dash gold medal in 1988 was worth about $10 to $15 million. Sponsorships, endorsements, commercials. And if you look at the increased salaries of professional athletes that are in the tens, sometimes hundreds of millions of dollars in earnings potential. My point is, as the stakes increase with upside potential in any sport, in any career, with that increase in monetary earnings capability, the correlation of at least some percentage of participants that will look for some type of competitive advantage is only going to increase. And what's unique about this article is in the past, it's always been about physical performance enhancement. But now we're starting to see cognitive and mental enhancement to specifically earn more money, win more esport tournaments. And I think that any profession or sport that can be benefited by some level of chemically enhanced performance will again drive at least some of the competitors in the profession to seek out and use said chemicals, including, like I said, musicians taking beta blockers so they can get the second chair in the orchestra. And their goal is to garner a real or even a perceived advantage. That's what's fascinating on the physical and mental side. Anyway, let me know what you think in the comments on www.fitterist.com/050 for episode 50, and we'll see you next week. With that, I'd like to thank you for taking the time to listen to The Fitterist Show. You can follow us on Instagram at FitteristMindBody and on Twitter at FitteristMind. If you enjoyed this episode, please send it to a friend or subscribe to make sure you don't miss any future episodes of The Fitterist Show. My name is Christopher Allen, and make it a magical day.